Have you ever been on a subway train? It's cold, it's dark, it's crowded. All of a sudden, you look behind you, you feel someone breathing down your neck. You turn around to see what the problem is. He looks agitated. It's a man. He's breathing hard. His face is covered in sweat. He's shaking. All of these symptoms and more indicate the man is suffering from a panic attack. Panic disorder. This time on Discovering Psychology. Panic is a serious disorder. About 1 in every 75 people suffers from this disorder. Unfortunately, this disorder is often misdiagnosed. This is because of physical symptoms such as sweating, trembling, shortness of breath, and racing heartbeat, chest pain, and nausea. Much of these serious disorders match other illnesses like heart disease, breathing disorders, and thyroid problems. It was even found in one study that only 1 in 4 people with panic disorders actually receive the treatment they need.
Can you describe your panic attacks, please?
Yes. Generally, a panic attack, once it starts, there are certain symptoms that occur. Usually they're physical. Ordinarily they're preceded by mental, the mental being me anticipating what's going to happen. And then the physical symptoms start. Usually it's pacing rapidly around the confined space if I'm in a confined space. Then I have very much shortness of breath, sweating, and an intense desire to get out of the space I'm in. Quite often I feel like I don't feel quite sick, but sometimes I can feel almost nauseous about the situation if it gets out of control. The problem with the whole situation is each symptom seems to build on itself to make it worse than if they were separated out. So basically what you have is a combination of symptoms snowballing on top of each other to produce an effect that is probably greater than any single symptom together.
How often have you been having these attacks?
They probably started when I was younger, and over time they seem to have gotten worse as I get older and older. I've noticed that things that didn't bother me in the past I could deal with without any symptoms now seem to produce anticipation, anxiety, and the actual symptoms themselves. So I have a lot more to deal with than I used to.
Can you remember a specific time in your past where you might become claustrophobic?
I would say specific, I can remember any one single incident, but I would say as I got into my early 20s, I first started noticing the beginnings of these symptoms, and as I say, over time they've progressed to get worse and worse and worse. Part of my job earlier in my career when I was in my 30s and 40s involved me being occasionally in confined spaces I couldn't get out of, and I particularly noticed at that time that those symptoms became virtually impossible to deal with without some form of therapy or medication or something, just something to deal, something to help me get through the symptoms as opposed to self-dealing with the symptoms.
Is there a family history of claustrophobia?
Actually, yeah, it's kind of interesting. I've often wondered whether this is genetic or environmental because I have 3 siblings, all of whom seem to suffer from the same anxiety disorders regarding claustrophobia that I do.
Okay, do you ever think that you're maybe, in fact, more afraid of experiencing the attack and its symptoms and the feeling like you're going to suffocate more than suffocating in the closed-in space or crowded area which you're in?
Absolutely. I think that anticipation of what's going to happen is as important as what actually happens, because once you've been in a situation where you've experienced a panic attack, for instance, flying in an airplane, getting on an elevator, that even the idea that you're going to have to do that at some point in time in the future, distant future or even near future, starts producing the anxiety that seems to trigger the symptoms themselves.
So how do you currently deal with your anxiety?
Probably at this point in time, avoidance. For instance, at my work, I'm on the 4th floor of a building, and I don't take the elevators. I use the stairs. I just don't want to get on the elevators because that's a situation that I know will create the panic attack, the claustrophobia. In certain situations, usually involving public transportation, after consultation with a doctor, there's certain medications that you can take that break the cycle of the anxiety such that it doesn't seem to affect me very much.
Okay, once you are in a state of panic, what do you do to calm yourself down?
Actually, there's virtually nothing that you can do to calm yourself down without some sort of external stimulus. Unfortunately, at this point, I haven't really pursued with a psychologist. There's forms of training that you can go through to teach yourself to do that. So if I get in a situation where I can't remove myself from it or produce the medication that sometimes helps me through it, it is pretty bad, really.
How does this affect your day-to-day life?
In the sense that I go out of my way to avoid situations that would put me into a claustrophobic phobia mode. That's how it would affect me. As I say, at work, basically, we actually had to get a set of keys made so I could use the staircase because they're locked. I use the stairs at work. I don't use elevators anywhere if it's possible. In fact, if I have to get on an elevator, what I will do is get on it by myself rather than with other people.
So you actually wait for an elevator to come?
I have been known to wait for a long time for an elevator to get one I can get on by myself. And when I fly, I use medication to deal with flying.
Okay.
We find that a combination of cognitive and behavioral therapies is the best treatment. Now, one method of cognitive therapy is cognitive restructuring. Restructuring teaches people to think about their attacks in a more realistic and positive way. Another treatment option is interoceptive exposure. It is part of a behavioral therapy. Because people with panic disorder are in fact more afraid of the actual attack than anything specific, like an object or situation, they can drive themselves into panic attacks by misinterpreting a symptom. Through interoceptive exposure, they learn that these symptoms do not have to develop into an attack by going through the symptoms in a controlled environment. And along with therapy, medication may also be prescribed. Usually, an antidepressant is given to control the level of serotonin. Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or SSRIs, tricyclic antidepressants, or TCAs, both affect the neurotransmitter. TCAs, however, affect the chemical neuroprapine as well. Some examples of SSRIs are Celexa, Zoloft, and Prozac. And some TCAs are Adapin, Ludiumil, Synquine, and Tofrenil. Then there's monoamine oxidase inhibitors, or MAIOs. These medicines block the effect of a critical brain enzyme, which in turn prevents the breakdown of serotonin and norepinephrine. Marplan, Nardil, and Pamate are all MAIOs. Other medications like Cymbalta, Disbril, Effexor, and Remeron can also help with panic by acting similar to TCAs. But what is important to remember is that although these disorders are real and serious, they are all treatable. So there is hope for those suffering from them.
Until next time, I'm Philip Zimbardo.